Anish Giri comes to the board. He is right now playing this round against Praggnanandhaa. In comes the CEO of Global Chess League, Samir Pathak, to wish him before the game. Anish had a rough start to this tournament when he lost to Gukesh in round 1. Then he managed to steady his ship but has had 7 draws in a row. So in this round number 9, he's on 3.5 points. He's still looking for his first win, and his opponent is going to be the leader of the tournament, Praggnanandhaa. Pragg is leading the tournament along with Gukesh and Nodirbek Abdusattorov, and he has been in fantastic form in this event. So Anish will have his task cut out with the white pieces. Also, Anish's health is not up to the mark at this event, but you can see him early to the game adjusting pieces. A handshake. Praggnanandhaa is here, and Pragg will be looking for a good game of chess because this is the last 4 rounds of the tournament, and if Pragg manages to play well, he can be in the running for the first place. Off we go. D4 by Anish. Pushes his pawn to d4. Let's see what Pragg responds back with. Pragg adjusts all his pieces now. And that is something that all chess players do. But Pragg is doing it quite a bit here. He's making sure. I think he's also thinking about what to play. And there he goes. Knight to f6. And Anish pushes his pawn to c4. One of the things about Anish Giri is that he is a very classical player. He likes to play openings which are solid, which are correct. Pawn push to d5. And now Anish plays his pawn to g3. The Catalan opening is on the board. And you give a check. So Anish comes back, and for the check, he decides to block with his bishop. Bishop to d2. And Pragg has 2 options. One is to go back, the other is to take, or the third one, which is to push the pawn to a5. And he plays pawn to a5, protecting his bishop. Anish plays his bishop to g2. And black simply castles here. And now we have a slightly unusual move, although this has been seen before. Queen c1. Generally you play queen to c2, but here queen c1 is played. And Pragg goes with his bishop back to e7. And castles it out here. Well, in certain specific lines, the queen on c1 is much better placed than the one on c2. And now rook to d1 played. Just putting the rook opposite the queen, it will be useful in future. Pragg brings his knight out to d7. And Anish moves his bishop to f4. He's looking in this direction, putting a bishop on a good square. And Pragg pushes his pawn to a4. Queen comes up to c2. The reason why Pragg has pushed his pawn is also because later on he can get his queen out to a5. h6 played here by Pragg. And Anish plays his pawn to a3. Well, maybe the pawn could become a potential weakness after knight c3. He brings in the queen to a5. Knight comes out to d2. and he plays knight to h5, attacking the bishop here. The bishop can simply drop back, bishop to e3. And is Pragg's idea f5, f4? He plays his bishop to d6. So Pragg is playing this a little bit dangerously, especially because his bishop on c8 is undeveloped. While you can see Anish has brought all his pieces nicely into the game. So the opening is working out well for Anish, and now Pragg plays a very provocative move, b5. And you can see there Anish comes back to the board and he realizes that one option is to take, play queen c6 attacking the rook and the bishop, but there is queen a6 defending everything. And he pushes his pawn to c5. This is an excellent move by Anish Giri because he attacks the bishop. And here the main problem that Pragg is going to face now is that this knight can be maneuvered via e1 to d3 to b4. But it's not so easy to spot it, and let's see if Anish Giri sees it. He finds it. He's an amazing player and he finds this move, knight to e1. And Pragg pushes his pawn to e5. He's like, I have play on the king side, I'll go e4, f5, f4 perhaps. Knight comes to d3. And here's the problem, if you play e4, I can definitely jump here, but I can also sacrifice and attack here when white is clearly better. So Pragg cannot push his pawn easily. He goes back knight to f6. And now he puts his knight on b4, attacking the pawn on c6 here. Anish gets up. And now the bishop comes to b7. He's defending the pawn on b7. Takes on e5. Knight takes, he takes with the bishop first. It's possible to also take with the knight, but then bishop d4 would have been very strong with e4 and f4 coming. So he takes with the bishop. And Anish plays his knight to f3, attacking here. Now if you were to go back here, then knight d4, and there's too much pressure on the c6 pawn. In fact, it's very difficult to even defend the position. So Pragg decides to go rook e8. He defends the bishop with his rook. And for Anish now, taking on e5 is not the best idea. He can go knight h4, coming into f5, and it's a very nice position. But Anish takes it. He takes on e5 and slightly lessens the load on Praggnanandhaa, because Pragg was low on space. Every trade is good for him. Rook takes e5 played by Pragg. He could have taken with the knight as well. Bishop d4, queen c7. The position remains quite fine for black. Rook e5. He plays bishop d4. For Pragg, what is nice in this position is that his pieces already have decent squares. So rook goes back to e7. Now he can bring the other rook to e8. And he would have some pressure. e3 played, a calm move. Now in the air are certain sacrifices here, which is knight d5, bishop d5, pawn d5 and c6. So you have to be careful about those. Pragg brings his queen back to c7. Anish puts his queen on c3, very subtly putting pressure on this diagonal, which is quite irritating. Pragg goes knight to e5. The knight could be useful to come to c4. And now comes f4. And good or bad, the knight must jump here. Of course, bishop f6, g f6, queen f6 looks very risky. But somehow after rook e6, black is holding his own here. But a human move is knight d7 and Pragg plays it. Now knight d3. and trying to play knight f2 and e4 can be a very powerful idea here for Anish. But he takes on d5. He sacrifices his knight. And this looks very, very beautiful, but also seems like after knight d5, bishop takes d5, black can survive here, take. And now you're a piece down, so you get your piece back with c6. And an important moment now is to forget about this pawn on g7 and knight b6 or rook e8 would be much better. But instead f6 played by Pragg, a big error. Big mistake here by Pragg. Because imagine if you go knight b6, takes, bishop g7, you have rook c8, and you are doing very well in this position, because somehow black has, it's a very tricky sharp line, but with f6 takes, queen takes b7, the problem now is you have landed in a one-sided position where you have no activity. Queen c7, Anish just puts his queen in, and this is game over, because it's not over, but it's really bad position. Knight to f8, because Anish Giri now has a fantastic bishop here on d4, and also his rooks are very powerfully positioned. Plays his bishop to c3, stopping any counterplay with b4, attacking the pawn on d5. He plays his rook to d8, defending the pawn. It's a position for two results now. Anish can keep pressing endlessly, while Pragg has the not so envious task of defending. Bishop a5 played, attacking the rook. And now rook to e8. He's attacking the pawn here on e3, but it can be defended with king f2. So king comes up. Now the rook defends the pawn on d7. Can we simply go in rook c5, attacking b5 and d5? Yes, he plays it. Rook c5 on the board. Anish is actually completely zoned in. I think he's even forgotten that his health is not so great. You don't want to be trading the d5 pawn for the e3 pawn. Which is why he comes back rook to c3. Maybe there was also rook d3, but then d4 would have been a bit shaky position. So rook c3, Pragg goes rook d7, and rook comes to d3, attacking the d5 pawn. We are moving close to the 40 move mark, where both players will get 50 extra minutes. Rook a5, rook a8, attacking the bishop on a5. Anish plays his bishop back to b4. And Pragg comes back with his rook to d8, defending the d5 pawn. And now new ideas have to be found to make progress. I think Anish trying to show here that he's the man in control by repeating the position and reaching move number 40. And Pragg, of course, repeats it with rook a8. Anish brings his bishop back to b4. The bishop is well positioned. The pawn on d5 is hanging once again. It seems like Pragg has to come back with his rook. And now he takes the open file with rook c1. Pragg pushes the pawn to d4, trying to get some counterplay going. Well, if you take, black cannot take here because of rook c8. So actually taking the pawn is not at all a bad idea here for Anish. But after some thought, he pushes his pawn to e4. He doesn't want to take the pawn. And this is also a decent decision there by Anish. But it feels like Pragg has some chances. He goes g5. Another way to play was just to play king f7, knight e6, maybe g6, just hang in there. But g5 is a very active move. King comes up to f3. Pragg has certain devious plans in mind. Rook e8 played. One of them is that he could go like knight e6, and if f5 there is g4 check and the knight gets this square. But for now he's played his rook to e8. He's keeping some eye on the e pawn, and Anish has to calculate whether g4, king g4, rook e4 is bad for him. He finds a fantastic move here, h4. The reason why this move is excellent is because now after knight e6, you see, I can push f5. You don't have g4 check because now there's no knight g5 in the position. h4 is very strong. So Anish finds it. He pushes his pawn to f5, an excellent move. Pragg goes back to d8, and he's hoping to put his knight on better route. I don't know if it can get to c6. He would be super happy, but that's not happening anytime soon. And Anish now has a winning move at his disposal, which is rook c8. And he finds it. Rook c8 is on the board. Anish Giri, excellent move here. I think Pragg seems to have miscalculated something. He thought that in this position he can play g4 check, which is what he plays. Now if king g4, black is back in the game with rook e4 check. And if the king goes back, then rook e4 is hanging. But king f4 is the move. That Pragg thought he could go knight e6 perhaps, takes rook c8, but then he's losing his own rook. So actually king f4 works. He pushes h5. Now Pragg has some thoughts in his mind, like if the bishop is not here, rook e7 takes here could be very strong. Bishop c5. Anish is very, very accurate. He doesn't fall for this bishop c3 trap because take cb2, and it's black who's winning because next up is knight e6 check. So plays bishop c5. Pragg now goes rook b7. Not a move that you make happily. Rook d4. Anish very sharp here. Picks up a pawn. And Pragg now gives a check. He's going to win the exchange. He takes on e6. Rook takes c8. And Anish pushes rook d5, defending the bishop here. And the main problem that Pragg faces, rook c7, attacking the bishop again, is that his pawns on h5, g4, all are very, very weak. Anish pushes his pawn to e7, so that if rook takes c5, he can take, rook takes, there's a queen. Goes rook e8. Take on h5. King f7. And king takes g4. And And now Pragg brings his king up. So white has 3 pawns already, for 3 pawns and a bishop for a rook. Rook comes to d5. And now rook c8 played. Black is trying to be as solid as possible, but the problem now is that the kingside pawns are just very strong. Pragg goes rook h8. Pawn to h5. The rook defends the pawn, and now g4 coming up next. So rook g8. Pragg already senses it that his position is pretty bad here. And Anish is being super careful for every move that he's playing. He's just making sure that he makes no errors. Rook e8. And rook to f5 played. So maybe at the right moment, Anish would just move his bishop back to d4 and attack the f6 pawn, rook c8, and give up his pawn on e7, but that would mean that he would then be able to start rolling his pawns. So bishop d4, if king takes e7, there's bishop takes f6 check. So take, bishop takes f6, and next up you go g5, h6, and the pawns are just rolling down the board. h6 played here by Anish, and it's time to throw in the towel here for Praggnanandhaa. He thinks for a bit and resigns. Anish Giri scores his first win of Tata Steel Chess 2025, and what a victory this was. Just amazing chess. Played a flawless game of chess almost there, Anish. Yes, Pragg could have defended better at several occasions, but somehow Anish's pressure right from the opening was a bit too much to handle. And what I like about both of them, they are very good friends of each other, is that they always like to discuss. And Anish, no matter whether he loses or wins, discusses. Pragg also, whether he wins or loses, always discusses. And that is the nice thing. The point here for Pragg to worry a bit about is that his tournament was going so well, and he was a bit worried that, you know, the second half should also go well. Is generally he messes up during the second half, and that's exactly what has happened. But he has an opportunity to come back tomorrow and strike, because if he manages to do that, he would be back in the race. But this loss has come at an unfortunate time for Pragg. Meanwhile, for Anish, he moves to 50% score, 4.5 out of 9. 1.5 points behind the leader, so maybe fighting for the top spot might not be easy. But who knows, you get a couple of wins in and suddenly you're very, very close there. There are 4 more rounds to go. And for now, I hope you enjoyed this game. Anish Giri with a nice play there, and Pragg has to fight back in the tournament.